It's going to be a spicy one today. We're going to talk about Yeshua and the Christ archetype. We're going to talk about Donald Trump. We're going to talk about the Antichrist archetype. We're going to talk about singing songs. It's going to be a good time. My name is Michael Gungor. Welcome to the Loving This podcast. This song that you're hearing is called Yeshua. I released it this last week with my friend Laura C. And Yeshua HaMashiach, those are the lyrics you're hearing, means Jesus the Anointed One. For those of you who have been following my journey for any length of time, this may feel a little surprising to release a song like this that, is quite orthodoxly Christian on its surface. And not to say it's like subtly heretical, but as I spoke about on the last podcast, Amazing Grace, I've been noticing more and more of a value in redeeming and reforming a lot of the language and tradition that I was brought up in. And it's not necessarily for like my own personal needs or edification. My spirituality is quite content in the silence. I don't really need any words, religion, or beliefs in order to rest in and as the love of God. But also increasingly, more so through time, even the phrase my spirituality makes less and less sense because there aren't really any personal edges to, quote, my spirituality. Because my spirituality is the connectedness of you and I and the ground that we share. And to share ground, sometimes we need shared language, shared meaning, shared ritual. We need some kind of true north. Like who are we? Why are we here? What is this for? What should we make of all of this? And if we can't point to a true north together, we can't cooperate on creating the kind of society we want. Creating the kinds of relationships and communities that can make life beautiful and sweet. And while most of us can probably agree on what the experience of True North feels like, we know what it feels like to be seen and loved and to see and love, it's harder sometimes to agree on the language and the direction that we use in our stories and where we point to get us to that true north. And so Jesus, for some, represents colonialism and empire and abuse or superstition, while for others, Jesus represents love, surrender, unity, welcome. And, I'm not sure if there's any way of getting around this because literally any word can be used for good, for harm. If we use even words like good, true, and beautiful, those words don't mean anything other than what we can agree that they mean. Like if we can get looking in the same direction and then call it good. But even then, so we say, like loving your neighbor is good. And probably everybody would agree, almost everyone on earth would agree with that. But for some people, they believe that what that means to love their neighbor. For some people, that's like, yeah, we take care of each other and help meet each other's needs. For others are like, yeah, that means we clear the neighborhood of all the threats, which might be anybody that doesn't look like them or believe like them. And for them, they could still think that they're taking care of their neighbors from the outsiders. But you see how those lines can get so quickly redefined, and what we're pointing to can be hard to agree on. And so because of this, I think we need to always be looking at our language is a living thing. Reformation is a necessary part of having any sort of theology, philosophy, ethics, because as the context changes, we have to adjust. So, what of Jesus? How do we adjust what we think of when we say Jesus? Why even use the language in the first place? Like, why am I still singing about Jesus? Or rather, why am I singing about Jesus again? Because I did stop for a long time. But I didn't actually stop singing about what I'm pointing to when I'm pointing to Jesus. I just stopped using the word. And the reason I stopped using the word for a while was perhaps for obvious reasons, for those of you who have gone through any kind of deconstruction or church hurt or that kind of thing. It's kind of obvious how religion goes bad and why one would want to get away from that. What might be less obvious is why I'd come back to this sort of language after, knowing full well how damaging and violent it can be. And it's because of the potential that I see in being able to have a shared language that we can point to the ground that we share. And whatever words we use, again, they can go wrong, but when we call it Jesus, or when we tie it to the Jesus story, there's something about this Jesus thing. It's not just the teachings of Jesus, but the whole story, actually, like his birth as a refugee, his baptism, his teachings, yes, his betrayal, his crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, the return. It's like the whole shape of the story might be like the cleanest archetype in my estimation. At least one of them, one of the most direct archetypes, shapes of how things are. It's clear enough that we've built the species, we've built our whole calendar on this. Enough so that it's become the dominant world religion. There's something true about the shape of this, regardless of whether you believe, even if Jesus was a literal historical person or not. The shape of, life coming out of death, the shape of distinction within union, the shape of the nature of God or the nature of reality emptying itself, giving up of what was for what can be. There's just so much in this story, in this shape, that's absolutely beautiful to me and profound and life-changing if we have ears to hear, as Yeshua said. And so what I want to point to today is less about any specifics about Yeshua, the person, or like the historicity of it. That's been talked about so much, That's arguably what most churches focus most of the sermons that they preach on, like what happened back then. It's what so much scholarship and historians and theologians have argued and debated about for 2,000 years. And I'm not a historian. I'm not a theologian or a scholar. And while I have my own kind of open-handed assumptions, I don't have any strong attachments to any interpretation about the history of all this or the future telling, the eschatology, as they say, the tales of how it goes at the end. But I do feel like I have a clear resonance with the truth of the archetype, the story itself, like the shape of the Yeshua story. And my relationship with it is direct. It's not abstract. It's not a belief system. It's more like, have you ever heard a song that somehow turns into your song? Like it's not their story anymore. Like it's yours. It just resonates so deeply, even though you didn't write this song. You feel the truth of it, like you experienced it, and it's undeniable. I'm not sure if you know what I mean by that, but it's like that. It's like there's something true about this story that has nothing to do with a history lesson. And that doesn't mean that I think it's fictitious either. Maybe all the history is accurate. Maybe it's not. It doesn't matter that much to me, actually, because the truth of it is true regardless of what happened in the past or not. It actually speaks to me of the current moment. And I think that's what Jesus' teachings were all about. They were calling us into the fullness of the current moment. And I think even the story around Jesus' death, crucifixion, resurrection, all that stuff, when you see it in that lens, that it's a story about how it is now, it's incredibly profound. It's not just a metaphor about life. It's actually like what we think of as life, what we think of as our relationships and how we go through the world. That's more like a metaphor for the shape. Like the deeper truth is this shape. It's almost like a geometric. Mind of Christ, see through my eyes, make us one in you. Bread of life, set us free, where it's no longer I, but Christ in me. And if the word that we use to point to the shape of that geometry is Christ, if we, just for this moment, just assume that what we're saying when we talk about Yeshua was the embodiment of this like avatar of the archetype, of the expression of infinite, complete wholeness, divine love, union with the ground of our being. And it's from that ground that comes the fruit of the Spirit, as they say, love, joy, peace. It's shalom. And that starts within us and moves outward into the world as we notice how we're connected, as we care for each other, as we love our neighbors as ourselves, which is also our way of loving God. If we count that as true north, then it raises the question, what's south? What's the true south, if you will? The direction that is the disintegration of that. In the Bible and many other traditions, there's this other archetype that in the book of Revelation is called the Antichrist. And in my view of things, this would be another way of talking about kind of what we're pointing to when we point to the ego or the superego or the demonic or the satanic. It's another way of talking about the move away from love into the experience of exile, into the experience of otherness and separateness, sin, you could say, hell, you could say. So if Christ is the self-emptying love that creates all things by dying to what was and resurrecting into the new, the Antichrist, or the ego, or the empire, is the rejection of what is, the fullness of the current divine reality, the rejection of the death, rejection of the cross in order to try to be eternal. Christ invites us to take up our cross and follow him into the death of what was, and the ego, conversely, tries to become permanent, tries to become indestructible, that my name may exist forever. In fact, maybe we could emblazon it in gold. Could we write it everywhere that we could possibly put it? I was here. I am here. I victorious. And so let's talk about Trump. Now, I do want to say, I don't like talking about political things anymore because it's just so divisive. But Trump has become more than just a political figure in our world. Like if I walk up to you on the street and say, hey, did you see what he tweeted? You know who I'm talking about. I mean, that's wild. It's like sort of the same level of cultural recognition and thought on someone, like in a way, as Christ is on the opposite side. Like Jesus is the only other person I can think of who, if I said some sentence with an undefined him, like, do you have a personal relationship with him? You'd know who I'm talking about. Most people could kind of gather what you mean by that without any proper nouns in the sentence. And I can't think of any other two names that elicit such fervor and such heat as Trump and Christ. Now, saying that, I do want to be clear that in the same way that I'm not trying to make any claims about the historicity of Jesus here, I'm actually not trying to make any specific claims about the person of Donald Trump or like what his experience is inside. I don't know. I'm not going to try to diagnose him, but I can at least talk about, I think, what he is to a lot of us in society and what he represents, even if that's not what his belief systems are. Because there's a shape to how Trump is related to our society, just in a way that, like how Christ is related to our society. Trump is quite a vivid and clear archetype in how we see him, how we interact with him as Antichrist. I mean, just yesterday, he posted an image of himself laying hands on a sick guy, and there's like angels, or one of them looks like a demon kind of, but coming out of the sky, and it's like he's dressed like Jesus, is very messianic, and it's wild. I mean, people are going crazy about it online. I guess just a little bit ago, he actually took it down and said that he thought it was like a doctor or something, which I don't know if you're buying that, but if you've seen the picture, it's not a doctor. It's quite Jesus-y. But as shocking as the photo was, I wasn't actually that surprised, because to me, it's quite obvious that he's been playing in the sphere of the messianic or the archetypal. It's just he's been playing on the Antichrist side of it. And again, I'm not saying that as a matter of history or eschatology. I'm not saying that he's going to be the Antichrist in the future who does something. I'm not trying to get into any of that. I'm not making any claims other than what he represents is a really clear shape of, someone who is obsessed with their own name, with their own legacy, with power, with, again, emblazoning his name in gold everywhere that he can touch. He wants to put a Trump Tower on the moon, according to his Truth Social. He can't seem to speak more than a sentence or two in a row without some kind of untruth being there. Obviously very obsessed with money, power, being great. And that's literally as clear of an archetype for the Antichrist as I can imagine. Other than, maybe if he started posting memes of him being the Messiah, it's just kind of like keeping it on the nose, keeping it clear. Again, I actually don't want this to be political. If you're like a big Donald Trump fan, that's fine. Pick somebody else to insert for the pure demonstration of ego and where it goes when it's taken to its extremes, if you'd like. But if you can get the sense of that shape where it's me, and that's the opposite of Christ, who says, not my will be done, but thy will be done, who lays his life down. So here's the takeaway of what I'm talking about here, because this does have practical implications. I'm not just trying to make commentary about the world, but I'm actually looking at how it is here and now, because there are two directions that we face in this current moment. Every decision, every second can be oriented either towards Christ or the Antichrist. Again, not as history or belief, but as actual sort of shapes of reality. For example, you can hear me talking about Trump as the Antichrist here and go, yeah, screw that guy and all of his Antichrist followers. But that sort of response would actually be partnering with and embodying that same Antichrist orientation. Because to the Antichrist, everything but me is rejected, needs to be killed, needs to be crucified, including, this is the irony, the Antichrist. So even the Antichrist hates the Antichrist. But you know who doesn't hate the Antichrist? who doesn't say no even to the Antichrist? Christ. All in all, Word made flesh, before it all, I am. Christ loves even those nailing him to the cross, saying, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. So this dual potential of facing this way or that way in this moment, towards Christ, Antichrist, towards love or towards fear, towards yes or towards no, towards heaven or towards hell. It's the same. Those are different words for the same thing, the same north or south. And, actually part of the brilliance of the Antichrist approach and directionality is that it's a counterfeit for the real. So anything, even in those dualities that I was just pointing out, anything can be used for the Antichrist's purposes. For instance, I said yes or no. And so we can go, okay, I want to face towards Christ, not Antichrist. So I have to get rid of all sense of no. But what we can lose in that is you're saying no to no. There's still a rejection with what is in spiritual bypass, in toxic positivity. We find other ways of letting the no sneak in. Even Christianity itself has often in its history actually embodied the Antichrist. It's been more about empire and more about an ego surviving into an afterlife. If it's on the right team by doing the right things or believing the right things, all of that is Antichrist stuff. So all of this is kind of part of why I wrote this song with my friend Laura C., Yeshua, because there's something about not just the ideas of Christ or of Yeshua, because those can be, again, counterfeited so easily. But what can't be counterfeited is the aliveness of what I point to when I'm pointing to Yeshua. What I'm assuming that he was the embodiment of, like the very direct embodiment of this living spirit, this union with God. There's no actual fake version of that. There's only exile or union. And again, whether you believe in a historical Jesus or not, I don't think that really matters. What I'm pointing to is the aliveness, and it's accessible here and now. The Apostle Paul said, it is no longer I who lives, but Christ in me. That didn't depend on accurate historical accounts. It's an alive, living orientation and relationship to the ground of our being. And so I like this song being experienced more as a mystical invitation, or a chant that's invoking the aliveness, the spirit of Yeshua. It's a kind of a mystical thing. I'm not chanting the name to think about a Bible story. Not repeating Yeshua HaMashiach over and over to drill in a theology into our abstract thoughts. It's actually inviting this body in this moment and this mind and these feelings and these sensations back into integration, back into shalom, which is the spirit of Yeshua. Perhaps I ought to mention that it's not just theoretical reasons that I'm using the name Yeshua either. I have had quite mystical experience where the specific name of Yeshua was a big part of it. In fact, what made me want to write these words was an experience that I had had at a spiritual center in the town that I live in. I saw a flyer for some kind of Christ event, and I went, and the woman leading the event said, Yeshua HaMashiach, like as an invocation at the beginning of this time. And when she said it, like I felt it in my body. I kind of went into a trance, honestly. It was like very intense. And I don't know how or why this stuff happens. I also don't even know how my computer is recording the sound of my voice right now, honestly. How does my voice turn into ones and zeros? I don't really know all the details. But sometimes you just do what works. And so if this works for you, if the name Yeshua invites you into presence, beautiful. If it's not the name that is your thing, that's fine too. I don't think what we call true north matters nearly as much as actually going true north. If you call true north west or south or east, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really matter if you're walking in the direction, in the territory that you want to go. And if the direction is towards love, presence, awareness, that's what I'm calling Christ. And so that's the invitation of this song. It's an invocation to that presence. It's an invitation into this in its fullness. And whatever we meet there, however the Antichrist shows up, can we meet it from a place of love and presence and groundedness? And notice that the Antichrist is part of how creation happens in some weird way. It's painful and it's scary, and sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's heartbreaking, and it's all the things. Sometimes it's romantic, but it's all in all. When you see from Christ, the thing is then we don't have to keep being the Antichrist when we remember. So if you're concerned about a world that seems to be quite dominated by a lot of Antichrist energy right now, rather than fighting that, which just strengthens it, fighting it on the outside, we can, like, again, the Apostle Paul, I think he was one that said this, our war is not against flesh and blood, but against the powers and principalities. Now, to me, that means that energy of the Antichrist, of the ego, the energy of moving away from what is into imaginary futures and imaginary pasts, living in shame, living in fear, rather than in presence. And this doesn't mean that we can't be socially or civically engaged. It doesn't mean that we're not acting in the world. It just means we're acting from a place of presence and love. The energy of Christ comes from wholeness, from fullness, from love. And yes, sometimes it goes out to seek the sheep that is lost, and there's like an intention and a movement about it, but it's a different kind of movement than the Antichrist movement, which is always from a place of lack. It's always from a place of incompleteness and exile and fear. And it's that energy that is what we're fighting the war against, not the people that are imprisoned by that energy. And how do we fight this war? Strangely, it's by picking up our cross and being willing to be crucified from what was, becoming alive to what is. And when we act out of that, the world is created in a different kind of way. And that's shalom. And shalom is not about the external world. Shalom is not about a political change. Shalom happens right in the middle of how it is now. It's seeing it already whole and complete. And then in that, the world becomes more beautiful, more whole, and more complete. And this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to the ego. The ego needs to act on an external world in order to try to get what it feels like it's lacking. But the spirit notices the chaos of the waters, like the story of Genesis says, and it hovers, it inhabits, it dwells in this. And that's where the power of creation happens. Thanks for hanging out. Come sing with us on tour. We're going to be out in May. Check out the website for that. Subscribe to the newsletter if you can. I love you. I love the livingness of you. I see you, even if I don't know your specifics. Thanks for being here with me. I'll leave you by playing the entirety of Yeshua. Hope you enjoy it.
Mind of Christ, see through my eyes, make us one in you. Bread of life, set us free. Where it's no longer I, but Christ in me. Yeshua, HaMashiach. Sing the name. Yeshua. all